In the political criminal justice system, the American people are represented by several equally important groups. An informed citizenry, including scholars, historians, lawyers, investigative journalists, and everyday civic-minded Americans who investigate, document, and report crimes committed by the president. An Office of Special Counsel, which investigates crimes committed by the president and recommends indictment. The House of Representatives, which impeaches or indicts the president for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And the Senate, which acts as a jury to convict and remove the president. These are their stories.
Get ready for impeachment.
Folks, we have a bit of breaking news as we bring our guest on, and we will let her react to. Of course, we're also up on all of our social media. Andrew just informed me, Brian Krasenstein, who apparently is a journalist, is tweeting that he says, quote, "I'm hearing chatter that Sessions is preparing a resignation letter. Could come as early as this weekend, only a strong rumor for now." Someone who voted in 1974 in the House committee that voted for the article of impeachment is former Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman. She's part of our expert panel when we do this. When it comes to analyzing what's going on with the Trump administration, Elizabeth Holtzman joins us now. Congresswoman, how are you this morning?
I'm fine. Thank you for your kind introduction.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you and to hear your voice. Would you like to react to this little bit of news we just are hearing? And again, we know it's just a rumor, but that Sessions is preparing a resignation letter. What, do you want to react to that?
We could all speculate. In some respects, I'd like to say good riddance. He's been a disaster as Attorney General. Has turned, his views about civil rights, his views about immigration are anathema. They're horrific. On the other hand, if he leaves, what's that going to mean for Mueller's investigation? So that's a matter of concern to me. Remember that the reason that Mueller was appointed is because Sessions had to recuse himself, and the Deputy Attorney General appointed Mueller. So if Sessions is gone and a new Attorney General comes in, is he going to start interfering with the Mueller investigation? This has huge. As bad as Sessions is, and in one respect, the question is he going to interfere with Mueller? And Mueller, who is the special counsel, and I wrote the original bill creating a special prosecutor, although it's not, the present situation is not as strong as I would have it. Still, the special counsel now, Robert Mueller, is the only thing that's standing between the U.S., between our constitutional system and the wreckage that Donald Trump is imposing on it.
Well, he's the rumors that it would happen this weekend. I joked yesterday, I feared another Saturday night massacre tomorrow night, Congresswoman Holtzman, that Trump might try to fire Mueller tomorrow night. But from this rumor, it looks like it may be a self-imposed massacre if Sessions actually ends up resigning. In terms of the indictment that Mueller has handed down, explain to the audience the difference between what Mueller has done this week and what we've discovered versus what was going on in 1974. The circumstance is a little bit different, and if my reading of history is correct, what Mueller has done is almost akin to the article of impeachment that you all voted on. It's quite as damning. It's not in the House yet, but it's a pretty serious indictment.
The indictment is very serious that Mueller is that the grand jury issued under Mueller's guidance and the prosecutors work. But impeachment that we voted in 1974 was for the removal of Richard Nixon for his abuses of power and his violation of the Constitution. That's very different. It's not a criminal prosecution. It's a removal from office. Of course, it's an indictment in a moral sense, but it was a removal from office. Still, what Mueller is doing right now is criminal prosecutions against individual people. It has not. He has not. The grand jury hasn't indicted Trump. I don't know whether they will, but let's remember that in Watergate, Richard Nixon was named an unindicted co-conspirator by the grand jury. That was one part of the operation. And of course, his top aides were all prosecuted and went to jail, every one of them, Richard Nixon. But this investigation by the special prosecutor is really at the beginning stages, and it's not reached Donald Trump directly yet. And even if he were to prosecute Donald Trump, it doesn't mean that Donald Trump would be removed from office. So the only way to remove a president from office is through the impeachment process, which is why it was created. So they're really two different things. And the standard is not the same. To impeach, you don't need to the president doesn't have to have committed a crime, and you don't need beyond a reasonable doubt standard, and you don't need a unanimous jury. So the processes are different, and the objectives are different. The framers put in impeachment clause into the Constitution precisely to protect the country from a president who does not believe in the rule of law, who abuses his power, who engages in treason or bribery or other similar kinds of crimes.
Those of you who are watching our video on social media, you're actually seeing the House Judiciary Committee voting on impeachment. The lovely young lady in the yellow sweater. You all see John Conyers and Barbara Jordan and others.
And don't forget Charlie Rangel.
Charlie Rangel was there, but
and Peter Rodino.
But the lovely young lady in the yellow sweater, that is Elizabeth Holtzman. She has not changed a bit when you all see in person, watch on TV. But now you mentioned Nixon, Congresswoman Holtzman was an unindicted co-conspirator.
Correct.
Didn't that play into the decision on the vote?
Not really.
Really?
I mean the House vote.
Right.
No.
Okay.
What happened was that the grand jury actually wanted to indict Richard Nixon, but the special prosecutor at that time, Leon Jaworski, told the grand jury that you couldn't indict they couldn't indict a sitting president. That was his personal view, and not every legal scholar agrees with that. Mm-hmm. So as an alternative, the grand jury voted him an unindicted co-conspirator. I mean, that's really significant because what it says is that 23 people believed that he'd committed a crime and participated with people who committed a crime. And so I just leave that out as a precedent if this grand jury finds that kind of information, and we don't even need to have a prosecution of the president to name him as an unindicted co-conspirator is a damning result. But the real difference between now and the time that we were doing Watergate has to do with the Congress. The Congress has been, in my opinion, in comparison with what happened during Watergate, pretty lax about the president. Remember, we've got three branches of government: Congress, the presidency, the president, and the courts. In Watergate, you had a special counsel. He was doing his job. The courts, they were doing their job. Even a tough, conservative Republican judge, John Sirica, smelled something fishy with the burglars, and he said, all of them are pleading guilty. Something smells about this. And so John Sirica imposed tough sentences. One of those burglars broke and said their higher-ups involved, and it goes to the White House. And that cracked the process. And the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the tapes had to be turned over to the grand jury, including Republican justices of the Supreme Court appointed by Nixon. So the courts did what they had to do, and the special prosecutor did what he had to do, and the Congress did what it had to do. There was a Senate that committee, Select Watergate Committee, and it had Republicans and Democrats. Sure, they started off in a partisan way, but in the end, it worked out in a bipartisan manner to find the truth. They were the ones, that was a committee, that found out the existence of the tapes that brought Richard Nixon down and confirmed that he'd not just committed crimes, but engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors and impeachable offenses. And the House Judiciary Committee did its part. So here, where are the investigations? I mean, some of the investigations are going forward, but they're not issuing subpoenas in many cases. They're not digging. They're not really trying to find out what's happening. It's a scandal. I mean, it's just a scandal because they've abdicated their responsibility. The framers of the Constitution. I'm sorry to talk about this in this way, but we had to do all this research. It's not impeachment isn't something that you learn or that I learned in law school, but the framers understood that some presidents, they didn't know what the president's name would be in 1789. They never heard of Richard Nixon or Donald Trump, but they knew there would be bad people as presidents. And so they relied on the Congress and the courts to stand up and protect the democracy from a president run amok. And the Congress is abdicating its responsibility under the Constitution. You can't have a system that our democracy is not going to work if the whole system doesn't stand up to the president. That's why the impeachment of Richard Nixon was so successful, and that's why even 43 years later, people don't say that it was unfair or that the president was mistreated. It's withstood the test of time, and that's the critical thing. Congress has to exercise its responsibility, and in my opinion, it hasn't.
Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman, I want to ask you a question. It may not be a very fair one, but I'm going to try this anyway. In terms of Nixon's crimes versus Trump's alleged crimes, and there are polls out saying half of America feels that he's broken some law, the crimes that we see with regards to him include obstruction and possibly collusion. If you could put both of those on a scale, Nixon versus Trump's alleged crimes, which one do you think would tip the scale? In your view, which one tips the scale for you?
Well, let's look. Nixon did some things that weren't necessarily crimes. Remember, you don't have to commit a crime to be impeached. So what Nixon did, let's just take a look at that, and then we can look at Trump. What Nixon did included covering up the crimes of his underlings who broke into the Watergate complex, the DNC offices at the Watergate. That included counseling perjury. That included telling people to lie to the Senate. That included getting information from the Justice Department and turning it over to prospective witnesses so they could change their testimony. That included offers of pardons to people. That included offers of bribes to people, payment of bribes. So that's just on obstruction of justice. But then he had an enemies list, people who disagreed with him politically. He wanted IRS to audit them. He created this enemies list. He had illegal wiretaps, completely illegal, of newspaper reporters and journalists and his own staff. He had authorized a break-in at the Daniel Ellsberg psychiatrist's office to get information to smear him. So there was a whole host of very, very bad things, abuses of power that Richard Nixon engaged in. We now know, many years later, that Nixon also colluded with, tried to interfere with the peace process in Vietnam, the conclusion of a peace treaty, in order to win the election. That led to the deaths of thousands of Americans afterwards. So, that we didn't know at the time. But I'm just saying that we always think about Watergate as a third-rate burglary, but Watergate is really a name for a whole host of other things that Richard Nixon did. Some of them never made their way into the impeachment process, but they were the background. I mean, the secret bombing of Cambodia that he did, lied to Congress and lied to the American people, and pounding money, refusing to spend money that Congress had authorized. I mean, there were a lot of very serious things that Richard Nixon did. Okay, let's look at Trump. The charges here, in a way, are similar. They may not have expressed themselves in the same way, but the basic charge about Watergate was the break-in had to do with affecting the election of 1972. Fast forward, what's involved here? This alleged collusion with Russia, well, the actual collusion with Russia, we don't know that Trump's campaign was involved with working with Russia yet. Well, we know that there were contacts, but we don't know that they colluded yet. But also had to do with obstructing the election of 2000, and an election in the United States, a presidential election. So the objective was the same, was to subvert our democracy. The means may be different, but what's interesting is that what's at the heart of both things that are being looked at, were being looked at in Nixon and are being looked at with regard to Trump, is an effort to tamper with, to undermine, and to subvert the electoral process. And that's really serious. It can't be a more serious crime, because how do we operate as a democracy if we can't have fair and open and free and democratic elections with a small d?
Yeah.
It's a destruction. It's the end of our country.
Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman, ladies and gentlemen, you see her right there on the video in her yellow sweater just now. We appreciate you joining us this morning, and always appreciate your expert analysis, always on point, very clear. And I know we're going to be calling back on you again, because I'm sure there are going to be more indictments, more investigation. Again, it's not wise to speculate, but it doesn't look too good.
I think you're right. I think there will be more indictments. We've only seen the beginning of Mr. Mueller's work.
Yeah, it doesn't look good. I mean, with the speculation was they would go with a little fish. Manafort isn't a little fish. And when he's saying the only person he reported to was Trump, I mean, who is between Manafort and Trump? And so, and last thing I'll ask you, would you not agree, Mueller's been pretty fast and efficient, hasn't he?
Yes, and he's assembled an expert team. I think people who are former prosecutors, and I'm one of them, know that this team is an outstanding team. Some of the most expert professionals have been put on his team, and that's really a major and important statement.
Yeah. Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman, always good to talk to you. Appreciate you. Okay.
Yep.
Take
Thanks
care.
very
We'll
much.
talk again real soon. All right. Take care now. All right.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks. That's MIP for the week. We'll be back with you live on Monday. Perform an act of kindness on behalf of an elder and young person. Respect, honor, protect all of the women. Write a letter to a sister, brother who just so happens to find her or himself incarcerated. Offer libations to the ancestors upon whose sturdy shoulders we all now stand, and whose eternal vigilance we humbly aim to emulate. And above all, give thanks to the God of your understanding by whatever name you call her and him. All God asks of us that we give each other love. For all of us here, Andrew, Brittany, Shay, all who help us out, we hope we do our very, very best every day. Not only to offer you all of the love, but to make it plain. Peace.